I'm a freshman in college, majoring in biology. I've always been passionate about science, and I'm excited to start this new chapter in my life. My name is Emily. My schedule is pretty packed. Morning classes, afternoon lab work, and I usually study in the library at night. Besides that, I love swimming and am part of the college swim team. It was one of those nights in the library when I met Mark. I was struggling with my chemistry homework, completely lost in a series of complex equations. Mark, a classmate I knew by sight, approached and offered to help. He seemed friendly and helpful, and I really needed assistance. I accepted his offer, and he sat next to me, patiently explaining what I was doing wrong. As we worked together, we chatted about trivial things, our classes, professors, and how we were adjusting to college life. Mark seemed like a nice guy, someone I could be friends with. We finished the homework, and he walked me to the library exit. Then he asked me out. "Emily, it was nice helping you today. How about we go out for coffee tomorrow after class?" he asked, with a smile that seemed a bit anxious. I hesitated for a moment. Mark was nice, but I wasn't interested in a date. "Oh, Mark, thanks for the invitation, but I already have plans tomorrow, maybe another time," I replied politely, trying not to hurt his feelings. He masked his disappointment with a forced smile. "That's okay, maybe another day. Good night, Emily." "Good night, Mark," I replied as we said goodbye. At that moment, I thought everything was resolved. I continued with my routine, studying, attending classes, and training with the swim team. The following week, I noticed Mark paying excessive attention to me during classes. Whenever I looked around, he was staring at me, which made me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, thinking he might just be trying to be friendly. Things started to worsen when he began sending messages and making persistent calls. Initially, I responded politely, but it quickly became clear that he wasn't just being friendly. His messages grew more personal and intrusive. He asked where I was, what I was doing, and who I was with. When I started ignoring his messages, he called repeatedly, to the point where I had to silence my phone during classes. One day, leaving the library after a long study session, I noticed Mark following me. At first, I thought it might be a coincidence, but when he showed up in the hallways of my dorm, I started to get really scared. He had no reason to be there, as his dorm was on the other side of the campus. I tried to confront him politely. "Mark, why are you here? Do you need something?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He smiled, but his eyes showed no humor. "I just wanted to see how you were, Emily. I've noticed you've been avoiding me." "I'm fine, thanks, but I think we need some space," I said, trying to be firm. He nodded, but his expression didn't change. "Sure, Emily. See you tomorrow, then." We said goodbye, and I quickly entered my dorm, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing. I decided I needed to tell someone about Mark's behavior. I called my friend Lisa and explained everything. She convinced me to talk to the college administration if the situation didn't improve. But the situation only got worse. Mark started appearing in places I regularly visited, like the campus cafe and the pool where I trained. Each time I saw him, I felt a chill down my spine. It seemed like he was always one step behind me, watching my every move. I began changing my routine, trying to avoid the places he knew, but it was impossible to escape completely. One night, while I was at home trying to relax after a long and stressful day, I heard a light knock on the window. My heart raced, and I tried to ignore it, thinking it could just be the wind. But the knocking continued, insistent and rhythmic. With a growing sense of dread, I went to the window and slowly pulled back the curtain. There was Mark, outside, staring at me with a disturbing expression on his face. I stepped back, my heart pounding wildly. How did he know where I lived? "Emily, please, we need to talk," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "I just want to talk to you." I tried to stay calm, but my voice came out trembling. "Mark, you need to leave, now." He continued insisting, and I realized the situation was becoming dangerous. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. "There's a man outside my house. He's been stalking me and he's here now. Please send help." While waiting for the police, I locked all the doors and windows, trying to keep Mark out. He kept knocking and talking, his words becoming more desperate and confused. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance and saw the red and blue lights reflecting on my living room walls. Mark noticed the police arriving and vanished into the night. before they could reach him. When the officers knocked on my door, I let them in, relieved but still shaking with fear. I explained the entire situation, from the first time Mark offered to help with homework to his increasingly intrusive and frightening behavior. The officers asked detailed questions and promised to investigate the case. They assured me they would do everything they could to find Mark and ensure my safety. However, it seemed like he was always one step ahead. Each time the police got close to finding him, he disappeared without a trace. In the following days, my anxiety grew. Every unexpected noise made me jump, and every shadow seemed to hide an imminent danger. I tried to continue with my routine, but the constant presence of Mark in my mind made everything more difficult. The police kept in touch, but the news was always the same. Mark seemed to have vanished completely. Days turned into weeks with no sign of Mark. The police did their best to reassure me, but the reality was that he had disappeared without a trace. I received a call from the detective handling the case. "Emily, we've done everything we can, but we haven't been able to locate Mark. It seems he has simply vanished." The news brought a mix of relief and fear. Relief because, on one hand, he was no longer in my sight, but fear because the unknown is always scarier. The uncertainty of not knowing where he was or what he might do next was almost unbearable. I had trouble sleeping, always alert to any sound, any suspicious movement. My classes, which were once a source of joy and learning, now felt fraught with tension. I constantly felt like I was being watched, despite knowing Mark was missing. Every time I entered a classroom or the lab, my heart raced, and I had to struggle to concentrate. With the support of friends and family, I began to rebuild my sense of security. The college administration was supportive, allowing me to change dorms and adjust my class schedule to avoid places and times when I felt most vulnerable. My friend Lisa was a rock throughout the process, always by my side, ensuring I was never alone. As time passed, life slowly began to return to normal. The feeling of being watched diminished, and I began to allow myself to relax, even if just a little. I realized the importance of always being vigilant, trusting my instincts, and not underestimating signs of danger. The experience with Mark taught me hard lessons about personal safety and the importance of being aware of people's intentions around me. I would never again accept help from someone I didn't know well, and I would always keep my friends and family informed about where I was and with whom. Despite everything, there was a cautious relief in knowing that Mark had never contacted me again. The absence of new incidents allowed me to start leaving the fear behind, even if slowly. My focus returned to my studies and the future I was building for myself. The experience had changed who I was. I became stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the importance of protecting my peace and safety. My name is Alex, and that night my friends and I were looking for an adventure. It was the last day of our junior year of high school, and we wanted to do something memorable. We were all together, me, Jake, Emma, and Sarah. Our friendship was solid, built on years of shared experiences. The idea to explore the abandoned elementary school came from Jake, who always had a thing for mysterious places and ghost stories. The school was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown vegetation that seemed to be slowly swallowing the building. The windows were broken, and the peeling paint on the walls told a story of years of neglect. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows over the grounds. Sarah hesitated a bit, but Emma and Jake's excitement was contagious. With flashlights in hand and hearts pounding, we passed through the creaky, rusty gate. The air was still, and every step we took on the gravel sounded like thunder in the oppressive silence. We reached the main entrance, a heavy wooden door that was ajar, hanging precariously on its hinges. "Let's go in," Jake said, trying to sound confident. Sarah grabbed my arm, and I could feel the tension in her grip, but we moved forward, one step at a time, guided by the shaky beams of our flashlights. Inside, the school was even darker. The walls were covered in graffiti and faded posters, silent reminders of a time when this place was full of life and children's laughter. The floor was littered with debris, shards of glass, pieces of wood, and other rubble. The smell of mold and decay filled the air, making the atmosphere even heavier. We decided to explore a classroom at the end of the main hallway. The desks and chairs were overturned, as if abandoned in a hurry. Jake, always the leader of the group, encouraged us to keep going despite our hesitations. We sat on the floor, trying to stifle our unease with jokes and stories. But as time passed, the school seemed to come alive. Small moans echoed through the corridors, light footsteps, creaking doors, wind blowing through broken windows. And then the adventure began to take a darker turn. The initial excitement gave way to a growing sense of unease. Emma, always the most sensitive of the group, said she felt like she was being watched. We laughed nervously, but soon the laughter faded. The school, once a stage for our fun, now seemed to be wrapping its cold, invisible arms around us. The feeling of unease grew with every passing minute. Then we heard the first strange noise, a dry sound, like something falling in the hallway. We all looked at each other, trying to understand what it could have been. Jake, trying to stay calm, suggested we check it out. We hesitated, but curiosity and fear pushed us to continue. We reached a slightly open door and hesitantly pushed it to see what was inside. The room was dark, but our flashlight beams revealed desks piled in a corner and a chalkboard covered in dust. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched was palpable. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hallway slammed shut, making us jump. We ran over, but there was nothing there but an empty closet. Panic began to set in, and the atmosphere of adventure completely vanished. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice reflecting the fear we all felt. We decided to go back to the classroom where we had started, hoping the familiarity of the place would bring some comfort. We sat down again, trying to control our breathing and calm our nerves. Then I heard something that sent chills down my spine, a dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor. I looked at my friends, and their faces reflected the same terror I felt. And then we saw it. In the dim hallway, a head peeking through the cracked door. The eyes were dark and empty, staring at us intently. I let out an involuntary scream, and everyone turned to look. The head disappeared in an instant, but the impact was immediate. We needed to leave, and fast. "Let's get out through the window," Jake shouted, pointing to the back window of the room. Without thinking twice, we ran over. The sound of footsteps running toward us filled the corridor, and panic took over. Jake broke the window with a chair, and we began to squeeze out one by one. The feeling of relief when we felt the fresh air outside was indescribable. We jumped from the window to the ground and ran as fast as we could, not looking back. The sound of something or someone chasing us echoed in our ears until we were far away from the school. Gathered, breathless, and terrified, we looked at each other. No one had answers, just the certainty that we would never return to that school. Jake, Emma, Sarah, and I shared a look of silent understanding. The experience had bonded us in a new and frightening way. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my voice still trembling. Jake, Emma, and Sarah nodded, still catching their breath. No one seemed hurt, but we were all visibly shaken. In the days that followed, we avoided talking about the abandoned school. Each of us dealt with the fear in our own way, but the experience brought us even closer together. We knew we would never seek adventures in places like that again. Curiosity had been replaced by a caution that would protect us from future dangerous situations. Even today, I sometimes find myself thinking about that night, the head peeking through the door, the unexplained sounds, and the feeling of being watched remain vivid in my memory. I learned to value safety and be aware of the dangers that can lurk in unexpected places. I never underestimate ghost stories and the warnings that come with them. The abandoned school is still there, a silent reminder of our adventure that almost ended in disaster. We never went back, and whenever I pass by that area, I avoid looking in its direction. I'm an elementary school student, living an ordinary life, with days full of classes, homework, and playing with friends. That afternoon, I was waiting in the schoolyard, where my mom always picked me up. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, while the few remaining students in the yard chatted and laughed. As I waited, I checked my watch. My mom was late, which was unusual for her. Then, a man I didn't know approached me. He had a friendly appearance, with a warm smile and graying hair. "Hi, you're Sam, right?" he asked in a calm voice. "I'm Josh's uncle, your friend. He asked me to take you home today. Your mom is busy and can't come." At first, I was surprised and a bit suspicious. Josh was my best friend, and I knew he had an uncle, but I had never met him before. The man seemed to know details about us, which made me relax a bit. "Josh is in the car, waiting. Come on, I'll take you to him," the man said, pointing to a car parked on the street. Reluctantly, I decided to trust him. I grabbed my backpack and followed the man to the car. With every step, a small voice in my head told me something was wrong, but I ignored it. When I reached the car, I noticed Josh wasn't there. The man reassured me, saying he was at home waiting for us. I got in the car, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. The car started, and as we drove away from the school, I began to feel a chill down my spine. Something about the way the man drove, the silence that settled in the car, made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. I looked out the window, seeing familiar streets disappear, replaced by areas I didn't recognize. As the car moved farther from the school, my discomfort grew. The familiar streets and houses gave way to a strange, run-down neighborhood. The man drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road. I tried to start a conversation to ease my growing anxiety. "So, is Josh okay? He hasn't talked about you in a while." The man glanced at me briefly with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Josh is fine. He's looking forward to seeing you." His short, evasive answer didn't help calm my nerves. Finally, the car stopped in front of an old, dilapidated house. The paint was peeling and the windows were covered with thick, dusty curtains. There was a sense of abandonment and desolation that made my heart race. The man got out of the car and told me to follow him. With each step toward the house, my instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck to the ground. Upon entering, I was greeted by a strong smell of mold and something more unpleasant, a mix of rot and filth. The house was poorly lit, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs in the corners. The silence was almost tangible, broken only by the sound of our footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The man led me to a room at the back of the house. The room was small, with dark walls and no windows. There was a single lamp hanging from the ceiling, flickering intermittently, casting strange shadows everywhere. He told me to enter, and before I could protest, he locked the door behind me with a loud click that echoed through the room. The reality of the situation hit me like an avalanche. I was locked in, alone, in a strange house, with a man who clearly wasn't who he said he was. Panic began to rise in my throat, but I tried to stay calm. I needed to find a way out. I looked around the room, desperately searching for anything I could use to defend myself or escape. My eyes landed on an old phone on a dusty table. I ran to it and picked up the receiver, hearing the dial tone with relief. With trembling hands, I dialed 911, praying that someone would answer quickly. 911, what is your emergency? The calm voice of the operator on the other end of the line was the most comforting thing I had heard in a long time. I'm locked in a strange house. A man brought me here saying he was my friend's uncle, but he lied. I'm really scared, I whispered, my voice shaking. What is your name and where are you? The operator asked. My name is Sam. I don't know where I am, but the house is old and creepy. Please help me, I begged, trying not to cry. Stay calm, Sam. We are tracing the call. The police are on their way. Stay on the line with me, the operator said, his voice firm and reassuring. I waited, listening to the muffled sounds of the house, hoping help would arrive before it was too late. Time seemed to drag on as I waited, trying to stay calm. The voice of the 911 operator was my only source of comfort. Stay with me, Sam. The police are almost there, he repeated, trying to reassure me. Suddenly, I heard noises outside the room, sirens in the distance, quickly getting closer. My heart raced, torn between hope and fear. Would they get here in time? In what felt like an eternity, but was only a few minutes, I heard loud knocks on the front door and firm voices announcing, Police! Open the door! My abductor shouted something unintelligible, and I heard hurried footsteps. There was a brief struggle, followed by a heavy silence. Soon after, I heard footsteps approaching the room where I was locked. The key turned in the lock, and the door opened, revealing 2 uniformed police officers. Sam, are you okay? One of them asked, his face concerned but reassuring. I ran into the officer's arms, feeling a wave of relief and emotion. Yes, I'm okay now. I replied, my voice still trembling. They led me out of the house, where other officers were arresting the man who had abducted me. He was handcuffed, his expression now one of utter defeat. Outside, the night was calm, a surreal calm compared to the chaos I had just experienced. The officers took me to an ambulance where I was examined, and soon my mom arrived, visibly shaken. I ran into her arms, finally feeling safe. In the days that followed, the incident left a deep mark on me.